Howdy folks, welcome to the Daily Coin. My name is Rory and today is Sunday, October 22nd, 2017. I have the great honor and very distinct pleasure of welcoming to the show for the first time Mr. Eric Zuesse. And Eric is an investigative historian. He is an author. He has authored approximately 7 books, all of which you will see there on the screen. You can find all of Eric's work posted at Washington's blog. You can find a number of his articles published at Strategic Culture and the Greenville Post. And we publish quite a bit of Eric's work at the Daily Coin. The conversation that you're about to hear took a direction that I did not anticipate. And I am very grateful that this conversation did not turn out the way that I had anticipated. So without any further ado, Mr. Eric Zuesse. I wanted to ask you, Eric, about Catalonia, if you're comfortable talking about what's going on there. And I wanted to go ahead.
Well, I am neither a proponent nor an opponent of an independence movement as a matter of principle. I do believe, above all, in the basic principle, however, of sovereignty of the people.
Yes.
The question really is always whether the government in a certain area is serving the people in that area. Without any doubt, there is some right that the residents have to separate from an existing larger national government. This, of course, has been the case throughout the eons, but I think that it would be a basic principle in the reigning international laws on the subject, except that the international laws on the subject are really quite vague.
Intentionally.
Of course. Of course. But the clearest instance in modern times, Rory, where the arguments in favor of an independence movement were clear was Crimea. And here's the reason for that.
Okay.
There had just been in Ukraine a coup d'etat, the planning for which had started in the US State Department by no later than 2011. And already by March 1st of 2013, the US Embassy in Kiev was hot and heavy with activity to organize the coup. The Wikipedia article about the Maidan movement says that it started on November 20th when the democratically elected president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, turned down the offer by the European Union for Ukraine to become ultimately a member of the EU. That is a falsehood, which is promulgated by not only Wikipedia, but by the entire Western establishment, i.e., that the Maidan movement was started as a spontaneous repudiation of Viktor Yanukovych's decision not to join the EU. The fact of the matter is, Maidan started being organized inside the embassy by no later than the 1st of March of 2013, several months earlier. And
you mean 2011?
No, this is 2013. In other words, it started in 2011. The event that is documented, that I know to be documented and incontestable, is that Eric Schmidt and another official of Google who actually was also at the same time an under Secretary of State working with Hillary Clinton. They both of them entered the Ecuadorian embassy in London in order to speak with Julian Assange. And Assange was given to understand that Eric Schmidt and his colleague from Google, Jared Cohen was his name, Undersecretary of State. As Assange's understanding was that these two men were wanting to interview him in order to understand his viewpoint for the benefit of Google. Actually, they were asking him questions about the use of the internet in order to organize a movement. Assange himself, in an article that he wrote at WikiLeaks subsequent to that meeting, said he finally realized that Jared Cohen was the master of coups for the Obama administration. And what happened is that what Cohen and Schmidt learned from Assange ended up being used in the operation that started inside the Kiev embassy in Ukraine on March 1st of 2013. So that's, in a sense, the second stage that I know of a signal event in the preparation of the coup that culminated in February of 2014, which, of course, practically everybody is aware of. Yanukovych was thrown out in February. What happened, of course, and many, many people know this because of their access to the internet, on February 4th, 2014, Hillary Clinton's underling, Victoria Nuland, who had been assigned, in other words, to carry out the plan, the wife of Robert Kagan, was very, very prominent, a proponent of invading Iran during 2002 and leading up to the U.S. invasion of Iraq, the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003. Robert Kagan, of course, he was a principal leader of Project for a New American Century, very, very prominent neoconservative. So too is his wife, Victoria Nuland. So Victoria Nuland on February 4th of 2014 instructed by phone Jeffrey Pyatt, who was the U.S. ambassador in Kiev, whom to appoint to run the government when the coup would be concluded, which occurred later that month. And she said, Yats is the man, Yatsenyuk. And she said he's got the governing experience, he's got the financial experience. Up to that moment on February 4th, just to judge from that phone conversation, which was subsequently uploaded to the internet, up to that moment, Jeffrey Pyatt thought that it was going to be Klitschko, former boxer, who was also an active politician.
Right.
But as soon as he heard from his boss that Yats is the man, he said, oh, yes, sure. He'd be better. So they were, she was basically transmitting instructions to the ambassador regarding whom to appoint to run the country after the coup would be over. And during the coup on February 20th, one of the events was particularly important in this regard, was that 8 busloads of Crimeans who were very peaceably demonstrating, holding up signs opposing the overthrow. These people were physically attacked, assaulted by members of the Right Sector Party, which was a military party which had formed long earlier in Ukraine. It was one of 2 Nazi or racist fascist parties that Ukraine had. Ukraine is the only country in the world that had 2 active Nazi parties, both of which traced their origins to the cooperation of their forebears with Adolf Hitler during the Second World War. One of them, being now called the Right Sector Party. They were all paramilitaries who had been trained by their leader. These people chased the Crimeans back onto their 8 buses, and they managed to escape. But a contingent of the Right Sectors group chased them and trapped them about 2 hours, something like that, outside of Kiev, and slaughtered some uncounted number of them and injured some of them for life. Captured on video is a pile of their corpses. And this was on February 20th, the culmination of the coup, which extended on through February 20th, 21st, 22nd, up to February 26th. Okay, so these people made it back to Crimea, and they appeared on radio stations and television interviews in Crimea. The Crimean population knew that the people who were doing this had the intention of killing opponents. And of course, subsequently, the plebiscite on the question of whether Crimea should be restored again to being a part of Russia was held on March 16th, less than a month after the pogrom at Korsan, as it is called. The whole question of Crimea is a clear example of an instance where the people of the area recognized that the new government in Ukraine wanted the land but did not want the people. Now, you don't have a similar situation. These are the types of considerations that I bring to the question for or against an independence movement. Now, there are other arguments, of course, Crimea to be a part of Russia than the one that I've just mentioned. Well, some of the others are that Crimea had always been a part of Russia until it was transferred to Ukraine by the Soviet dictator in 1954. No explanation was ever given for his having gifted Crimea from Russia to Ukraine in 1954, but that dictator happened himself to be a Ukrainian, Nikita Khrushchev. And people speculate that maybe that had something to do with his decision in that regard. In any event, it was a transfer of sovereignty that was not by any means voluntary to the residents of Crimea, most of whom, almost all of whom felt and had felt for hundreds of years, at least since 1783 when it was official, Crimea was a part of Russia. They just assumed they were Russians. Well, actually now, all of a sudden, they were Ukrainians. Well, okay, that worked out all right until Obama decided to replace the Ukrainian government with a racist, fascist, anti-Russian government, which wanted to eliminate Russian speakers from Ukraine. In other words, get the hell out or die. I mean, you don't have that in Catalonia. So I would have to look further into the Catalonian situation before I would say whether or not I would be a proponent of Catalonian independence. It does seem, however, that the vast majority of the Catalan people do want independence. I think that is a very, very important fact, probably a decisive one.
Yes.
But
my point is that the people of Catalonia want to be recognized as an independent state from Spain.
Of course.
The exact same as the Crimeans want to be recognized as Russian and not Ukrainian. And you have the government, you have an illegitimate government in the situation with Ukraine, but then you have a overarching dictatorial style government that proclaims to be a democracy, but their actions say that they are not a democracy because they aren't listening to the people. And when you have the people rising up and saying, we no longer want to be part of this nonsense that you proclaim to be, but are not. And the Spanish government's response is to do everything that they can to squash the movement. So it's really exactly the same thing that you have in Ukraine and Crimea, you now have in Spain and Catalonia.
No,
It's just different. It's a different
very
approach.
different. Very, very different background to the two situations, Rory. I don't agree with that. The reason I don't agree with that is that the Crimean people were given a choice between leaving and dying. That is the Crimean situation.
Okay.
This is not the situation in Catalonia.
No, but my point is that this is an overreaching totalitarian government in both situations. The people are of no consequence. The people's voice is of no consequence in either of these situations.
Well, here's where I disagree with you on that. Okay. We had and have in Ukraine right now the Obama imposed Nazi government.
Yes.
Okay. They're not obsessed against the Jews, they're obsessed against the Russians, but it's the same thing.
Right.
Hitler was pretty obsessed against the Russians too. And if you read Mein Kampf and if you read Hitler's second book, you see, and particularly in the second book where it's an obsession, he was really determined to enslave all Slavs. His plan was to exterminate all Jews and to enslave all Slavs. I mean, he saw Jews as not being humans. They were descended, he believed from Adam and Eve. I mean, the Jews were the Aryans were the people who were descended from Adam and Eve, and the Jews were descended from the snake. Okay. That was his view. Okay. Whereas the Russians were simply they were just an inferior race of humans, as he saw it. All Slavs were an inferior race of humans in his view. And they existed on this planet in order to serve the pure-blooded descendants of Adam and Eve. Okay, I mean, that's what the racist fascism is like. Okay, so the thing is, you had a Nazi government in Ukraine. You have it today. You do not have a Nazi government in Spain. Now, you say it's not a democracy. Well, we sure as hell aren't a democracy either.
No, far from it.
Right. And incidentally, the now famous and classic Gillens and Page study, which is the only study that has ever been done, scientific and incredibly rigorous in its methodology and using a vast database. The only study that's ever been done on the question of whether or not the United States is a democracy or a dictatorship found it's a dictatorship. They call it, well, they were very, very hazy in the article itself because they realized they were talking about something explosive, which was very naughty to do.
Right.
Okay. So
can't have the truth getting out there.
they didn't use the word aristocracy. They didn't use. I don't even think they used the word billionaires. They didn't use the word oligarchy. They didn't use common, ordinary language. But they said it. Okay, they said it that the United States is a dictatorship, and the way that the rest of the profession paraphrases it is that it showed that the United States is an oligarchy. Okay, oligarchy. That's like in Honduras, in Guatemala. In El Salvador. Oh, El Salvador. That brings to my mind one of the oligarchs of El Salvador, or oligarchic families, is Marcos Mulitzas, whose family is part of the El Salvadorian oligarchy. He then was trained in the CIA and did some jobs for them, and then he founded the quote, end quote, progressive Daily Kos, website so that the CIA can have control over Democratic Party progressives. I mean, the way the system works is incredible, incredible. Well, I love that example because I am allergic to hypocrisy. And to me, there is no imaginable hypocrisy that can exceed this far right winger being a leader in the Democratic Party left wing.
And who is that?
Marcos Malitzis,
Okay.
the Daily Collis website. Oh, and he runs it rigorously. Oh, okay.
You're saying the Daily Chaos, KOS?
Daily Kos.
Kos.
Oh, it's a very famous website in the Democratic Party progressive movement.
How do you see, Eric? How do you see what's happening with Syria right now, with ISIS, with Russia coming in and really taking charge of the situation in Syria? I mean, Russia really took charge after Putin made that really great speech at the United Nations in September of 2015, I believe, or 2016.
Yes. And then the military activity, started on September 30th of 2015, and from then on, it's a transformed situation. Transformed
completely.
But the incredible history here, the public generally doesn't understand. John Kerry, first of all, the first thing to understand is that on September 9th of 2016, John Kerry finally managed to reach an agreement with Sergei Lavrov, Russian foreign minister. His boss, Obama, said, okay, let's sign it. An agreement that in preparation for peace talks, the Russians would be able to continue bombing Al-Qaeda. That was the hang-up until September 9th. The United States refused to allow Al-Qaeda to be bombed by Russia in Syria. They were called al-Nusra. The agreement that was signed on September 9th of 2016 allowed Russia to bomb Al-Qaeda. Now, the United States government never opposed Russia's bombing ISIS, but the United States was relying very heavily upon Al-Qaeda to do its dirty work in Syria, because we and the Sauds were supplying the weapons and the money for al-Nusra to recruit from abroad and to bring in through Turkey, it was at that time, now it's through Jordan, weapons paid for by the Sauds to supply to al-Nusra and their cooperating jihadists in Syria. So there was a big breakthrough. John Kerry finally managed to get Obama to agree to, so that not only would Russia be able to continue bombing ISIS, they would continue to bombing Al-Qaeda. And the agreement went into force just 3 days later on September 12th. But then on September 17th, the U.S. bombed Syrian government in Deir Zor, the big capital city around in the oil region. The U.S. bombed the Syrian army on September 17th after having promised in agreement that had been signed on September 9th not to do that, and for the United States to discontinue temporarily its war against the Syrian army. So this was a clear violation. The Obama regime said, oh, it was just a mistake. Well, it clearly was not a mistake. And from that moment on, Putin made the decision, we cannot trust this regime at all. And they then started, Russia then organized the Astana peace process to replace the US-Saudi peace process. Total replacement. And the previous peace process had been nominally overseen by Stefan de Mistura of the United Nations, but he was just a figurehead. It was really run by the son of King Saud, who
Mohammed bin Salam.
Yeah, right. That guy had engineered the U.S. Saud peace process in the following way. The Saud family selected, handpicked the representatives, the people who would represent the opposition in that peace process. So the opposition were selected by the Saud family. I mean, can you imagine? A foreign king or prince, crown prince, was choosing whom would represent the opposition to the existing government of Syria. It's a foreign king. I mean, this is outrageous. And yet
It's amazing.
the United States backed it 100%. And that was the peace agreement that was drawn up by Lavrov and Kerry. And Kerry thought that Obama really meant it when he said yes. But then Obama sabotaged the whole thing. And that is when we entered into a new world. Of course, we entered into a new world back on September 30th of 2015 when the Russian jets and missiles started pouring onto ISIS.
Yep.
And onto Al Qaeda and U.S. supported boots on the ground. There are proxy forces in Syria. Well, but the thing is, after that, I mean, from that moment on, Putin knew that Obama was really out for blood against Russia. And of course, the Syrian government is a key ally of Russia. So, the United States wants to destroy it, replace it with its own and, basically Saudi affiliated a dictatorship, which would be, of course, a jihadist nation, one very, very strict fundamentalist Sunni, the same kind of people that were involved in 9/11 attacks.
What do you see the United States being able to do at this point in Syria other than making some sort of attempt to get out? Or can the United States get out without this whole thing just kind of escalating? Or is it just going to continue to roll along the way that it currently is? I mean, because it's just a huge mess right now.
Well, it has been a huge mess that was created by the U.S. and Saudi regimes.
Yes.
I mean, basically, you have to understand, ever since 1949, the CIA has been trying to overthrow the Syrian government. There is a really terrific article that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. published at echowatch.org. Syria, another pipeline war. He uses as sources not only the stuff that is in the written record, but what he had heard as a child, because Robert F. Kennedy was very close to a lot of the people who were involved in forming U.S. policy towards Syria at that time. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. writes, clearly the rot that rules us in America is an aristocracy, which is incredibly hypocritical. And this situation did not begin when the Soviet Union broke up. It began longer ago by far. But the thing is, I've tried to track what the origins of it actually were. And I think that President Truman himself was ignorant of a lot that was going on down in his administration. He knew, for example, he knew enough not to make Allen Dulles the head of the CIA. He hated Allen Dulles' guts. Okay. But I don't even think that he was aware of what Allen Dulles' right-hand man, James Jesus Angleton, was doing to Europe. I mean, there was I'll give you an example. There is a terrific 2-hour-long BBC documentary in how the CIA and MI6 set up hundreds of terrorist incidents in post-war Europe that were blamed on the Reds. but that were actually done by, quotes and quotes, our side in order to create a pretext for keeping communism out of and banned from Western Europe. There was a lot of bloodshed in Europe after World War II that was perpetrated by the US and UK governments and associated aristocracies. And you've got in this documentary from the BBC some of these, Sir this and Baron that and Duke this and so forth and so on, talking about what they did with great pride, their contribution to the war against communism. Well, I mean, their motives for the war against communism were not the same motives that have ever been publicized in the West.
Probably never will be.
Never, probably never. But the thing is, I was just amazed that this documentary was so honest. It was done as a work of art. I mean, you were seeing people testify to what they had done, one after another, decades after the fact. And the picture is very, very clear. And you can so well understand why the United States brought so many, German scientists and other, for example, very pro-German Ukrainians to the United States. And also, of course, they were very heavily into Canada, where the current prime minister happens to be the daughter of one of the leading Ukrainian Nazis. Her father had been a propagandist for the Nazis in Ukraine during World War II. He's no longer alive, but the thing is that the current prime minister, the foreign minister of Canada, is from that family and very proud. And she herself was a terrific champion and has been a terrific champion of the coup in Ukraine. She is also a famous journalist. She was for a long time a journalist at the Financial Times who appeared often on television here in the United States on all the networks. But she now is the foreign minister of Canada. And of course, this is supposed to be a liberal government, the Trudeau government. He chooses a Nazi, an anti-Russian Nazi, to represent.
This has been one of the most interesting interviews that I have done, maybe ever. It's certainly one of the most interesting that I've done in quite some time. The knowledge and the wisdom that you bring, the history that you bring to life with what's happening in our world and with these completely out of control governments, if you can even call them governments. They're more like criminal gangs that operate on a global scale with massive firepower, more so than governments. And
media.
I'm sorry?
And with the news media.
Yes, well, they have to have cover, and the news media provides them with all the cover that they can afford to buy, which is all of it.
Well, but they own the networks.
Correct.
They own the big newspapers. Like, for example, the Washington Post is owned by Jeff Bezos.
Right.
He bought it after he had received the multi-billion-dollar NSA, CIA contract to provide the cloud computing services for the U.S. government. And it also serves the Pentagon. The thing is, Jeff Bezos is now a major beneficiary of the military-industrial complex.
Well, he always has been. I mean, it's long been rumored or thought that Amazon wouldn't even exist without CIA black ops money, without all the flow of heroin, drug money. There would be no Amazon. There would be no Facebook without the CIA. They wouldn't exist.
Well, that's an interesting thing there. I'm not knowledgeable about that, but there is a terrific article by the great investigative historian Nafiz Ahmed about, I think it's titled, How the CIA Created Google. Oh, God, everyone should read that. Everyone should read that. How the CIA created Google. I mean, Google would not exist,
right?
And its billionaires would not be billionaires had they not been created, backed for over a decade before the corporation existed, had it not been set up by the CIA and the U.S. aristocracy behind the scenes.
Makes perfect sense to me.
Nafiz Ahmed, a great writer.
I'll definitely include the link to that, along with the Robert Kennedy Jr. article that you referenced earlier as well.
Okay, so
those will be in the description below.
Oh, great! And may I repeat those two titles?
Absolutely.
Syria, Another Pipeline War. That's Robert F. Kennedy's great article, and Nafiz Ahmed's great article, How the CIA Created Google.
Yep. I will, like I said, there'll be links below the video to both of those articles. And I'm also going to include, Eric, links to several of your books. You are being an investigative historian and author, and a couple of the books that you've written. One is Christ Ventriloquist, the event that created Christianity. They're not even close. The Democratic and Republican economic records between 1910 and 2010, and Iraq War, The Truth, all of which you authored, all three of these books. And I'll include links to those books as well as all the others that you've written as well.
And the Iraq book, unfortunately, is out of print.
Oh, that's too bad. That is a shame. I think you can still probably find it on Amazon.
Maybe.
But I certainly appreciate all your time today, Eric. And you can find Eric's work published. You don't really have a home site, do you? Not that I'm familiar with.
Well, it's interesting. I was booted off of Huffington Post after they're having run like about 200 articles of mine. They bumped me off because one of their editors made the mistake of giving prominence in positioning on their site to one of my articles. The one I'll tell you, I'll send you some links to some of my articles that I think are particularly relevant. But this was certainly one, and it had 60,000 likes on Facebook. Okay, it had 2,800 and some reader comments, and after that article, they booted me. But where I appear now is at WashingtonsBlog.com.
Yep,
mainly, and that's my main site. WashingtonsBlog, one word, .com.
Yep. As well as Strategic Culture, which is where I find a lot of your work.
Yes, but not all of it. Whereas I do post directly onto Washington's blog.
Okay. Which is a great website.
It is.
Well, Eric, I certainly appreciate all your time today, and I hope that we can do this again in the not too distant future. This has been a wonderful, like I said, a great overview of everything that's happened in Ukraine and how that whole situation developed. It's been awesome, and
well, I've enjoyed it enormously.
Well, we'll do it again in the near future, And Eric, I certainly appreciate all your time today.
Thank you.